Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 Senate elections, specifically through the lens of Donald Trump and how I think he will affect Republican candidates up and down the ballot across these competitive states. Before we get into it, please be sure to subscribe if you have not done so already. We're so close to 6,000. Again, once we get there, I'll be doing a subscriber-decided election night with a new theme. I think that'll be pretty fun. It'd also help my channel get more exposure, so if you have not subscribed already, please do that. And without further ado, I do want to get into this video. So, as you can probably already tell, Republicans, once you take away the non-competitive races that I've already filled out, they're in a pretty good spot to retake the Senate next year. And that's because of the map. Of these 8 races that I've left competitive, they are on offense in 7 of them. They only hold 1 of them, and it's Texas, and they're pretty clearly favored to start out that race for now. And additionally, Republicans in most of these races, they have the luck of I guess I should say a lot of these races that they're on offense on are held in either Trumpy states or right-trending states. And, for example, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, I'd say those states are at least to some extent right-trending. I think Nevada's right-trending. And Montana is a state that Trump won by 16 last time. So they have a pretty good map, to say the least. They couldn't really have asked for it to be any better, but they underperformed in 2022, and the question is, can they actually lose the Senate this year? And I think the answer to that is yes, they can. It's not what I'm predicting to happen, but let's talk about how Donald Trump is going to impact these races and how he could cost Republicans the Senate next year. And so we're going to start out in Nevada, and Nevada is problematic for Republicans. I think that Trump's going to lose it by a little less than he lost it by in 2020. That's mostly because I think he'll do better in Clark County, which did swing to the right last election rather. And it's a county with, I think, almost 80% of the state's population, so even a 1-point swing towards Republicans there goes a long way. And so I would say that Trump's probably going to lose it by maybe just under 2%. He'll probably do about a half a point better statewide. And that's not insignificant, but it doesn't do much to help Republicans because he's still losing the state. But the bigger problem that they have is Jim Marchant, who's likely to be their nominee. He ran in 2022 for the Secretary of State position. He lost to Cisco Aguilar. And this was actually a pickup for Democrats because Aguilar was not the incumbent, right? He wasn't a really strong candidate. He just was better than Marchant, and he won by 2.3%, pretty similar to the amount Biden won by in 2020. And Marchant underperformed Laxalt by 1.5. He underperformed Joe Lombardo by almost 4 points, and that's really bad for Republicans because he's likely to be their nominee for Senate next year, and against a Democratic incumbent who beat an incumbent Republican senator by 5 back in 2018. That's just not good. And Donald Trump I think this is the one state where Donald Trump might actually do a little better than the Republican nominee. Or I shouldn't say the one state because he'll do better in some states. But I think this is the one competitive state for example, Montana does not have a presidential race that's competitive, but they do have a very competitive Senate race. In Nevada, both the presidential race and the Senate race are competitive. And this might be one of the states where Trump actually does better than the Senate nominee. But either way, if Republicans are running someone like DeSantis or a Tim Scott or a Nikki Haley who would maybe do better in Nevada, I think Scott would win Nevada for sure, then that would be really beneficial for Republicans. But again, Donald Trump does not give you a lot of upside in a state like Nevada. I think he certainly doesn't help them here. He also hurts them in Arizona. And Arizona is even more extreme than Nevada because Trump was the first Republican to lose Arizona since Bob Dole in 1996, and that's a huge problem for them. He lost it by 0.3% in 2020, and the issue that that Republicans have here is that it's a left-trending state. It's not like Nevada where they can count on doing better every election. In Arizona, it's kind of the opposite. In 2022, they did really poorly here. They lost the big 3 races, which are the Senate race, the governor race, and the Secretary of State race. They also lost the Attorney General race, if you count that as a important race. I don't. Obviously, they have impact. You should always go vote, but AG races are more down ballot, whereas Secretary of State, Senate, and governor have pretty significant impacts on the everyday lives of people in the state. And so Republicans lost those races, and they lost the governor race was close, but the Senate and Secretary of State race were pretty decisive for Democrats. They won each by 5, and that's just really unfortunate for Republicans because the candidates they ran in those races all three of them were election deniers. All three of them were very right wing, and two of them, Lake and Masters, are potentially running for the Senate seat. And I think if either of them gets the nomination, Republicans are in a lot of trouble here. Ruben Gallego, I don't think he's that good of a candidate. I think he's fine. I think he's sufficient, and I think would beat Lake or Masters. But again, Democrats in Arizona are going to really benefit from having Trump and one of Lake or Masters on the ticket if that's what happens, because it allows them to paint Republicans as extremists pretty easily. And again, Arizona is a moderate state. It's really concentrated around these Phoenix suburbs in Maricopa County. And again, this county was very strong for Mitt Romney, was very strong for John McCain, voted for Bush easily twice. But Donald Trump was the first Republican to lose the county in a while, and Republicans haven't improved since then. They've been losing it consistently in most elections for the past 4 or 5 years, and that, again, really harmful for them. Now, I want to move on to Wisconsin, because Wisconsin is, I think, a state where Trump could actually do better than a Republican senatorial nominee, but he still presents his own fair share of issues here. So this state, he lost by 0.7% in 2020. He could win it back this time. I think he's a narrow underdog in the state, but let's say he does better. Let's say he loses it by 0.5 instead of 0.7, right? So he does marginally better. Republicans are likely to run David Clark, who is the sheriff of Milwaukee County, or former sheriff, rather. And like Masters, Lake, and Marchant, he is an election denier. And that, again, it hurt Republicans last year, the election denialism, and it's going to hurt them again, especially in a state where Joe Biden won. And so Tammy Baldwin, who's the Democratic incumbent here, very popular. She outran Tony Evers by 10 in 2018, and she, again, won this race by 11 points. And so I don't see how Republicans can beat an incumbent that popular when they're running an election denier like David Clark. So I'm going to see that seat's likely likely Democratic. I think Donald Trump really hurts Republicans there. And furthermore, it would be easier for David Clark to win. I think he's a bad candidate on his own. I don't want to blame Trump for all of that. But if Trump were just capable of doing better in the WOW counties, which again he did horrible in 2020, he saw pretty significant swings against him there last time, and I think we're going to see a similar thing again. When Republicans can't net those votes out of the suburbs the way they used to, it gets hard for them to make up ground in Wisconsin. I'll just leave it at that. Michigan's similar. Trump obviously has his strengths in the state. He did win it in 2016, but he lost it in 2020. He's not likely to win it back this year. And Republicans don't really have a clear nominee for Senate next year. It could be James Craig. I think he'd be a decent candidate. But again, James Craig, to me, is not a very, I'd say he's not a world beater. I think he's like a B-level candidate. He's not horrible. He's better than David Clark, Blake Masters, Kerry Lake, and Jim Marchant, but he's still not a particularly good candidate. And if Democrats run Elisa Slotkin, who I think is decent too, I think she's in the B range as well. I think her and Craig are pretty similar in that they're above average, but not significantly so. That kind of just leaves the matchup in Michigan Senate race up to the presidential race, which I think Biden is likely to win. Trump lost it by 3 points in 2020. And again, Michigan seems to have gotten bluer since then. It could be broadly right trending in the future, but in 2022, Democrats won the governorship by 10.5. They won the attorney general race by, I want to say, 8, and they won the Secretary of State race by like 13. So they did very well their last midterm. They flipped the state legislature for the first time. It's like the 80s. And again, Michigan is a state where Republicans don't have any momentum. They haven't won a statewide race there in 7 years. So they're going to have a lot of problems, I think, generating momentum. And again, if Trump loses it like he did in 2020, hard to see how James Craig could overcome that. I think the same thing goes in Pennsylvania. Donald Trump, to me, is not a very good candidate for Pennsylvania. He won it in 2016, but that was kind of it wasn't a fluke. He won it for a reason, but it was a different circumstance. And in 2020, he lost it by a point. And since then, Democrats have won a Senate race by 5%. They flipped that Senate seat. They've won the governorship by 15%. And they flipped the state house. And so what that means is that Republicans really have to find a way to make up votes here, right? They're losing ground quickly in the Philadelphia suburbs. Chester County and Montgomery County have gotten, and Delaware as well, they all got between 4 and 8% bluer in 2020. And I think they continue to get bluer. They're left trending. John Fetterman, despite running a pretty mediocre campaigning for the suburbs. He was not viewed as a good candidate for the suburbs. He ran even with Biden in all these suburban counties. And so that really just goes to show that they're truly left-trending areas. And if they keep trending left, that means Biden will net tens of thousands more votes in this region. Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, left-trending county. Fetterman did very well there last year. Shapiro did even better. And the Pennsylvania Republicans, which really have had a lot of problems, kind of like Michigan. They haven't had any momentum. They haven't won a statewide race, or they haven't won a federal race in 7 years, I should say, because they did win the treasurer race in 2020. But again, the Democrats or the Republicans have to find a way to make up votes here. And I don't think they can do it in the Philly suburbs. Pittsburgh is getting worse for them. They can maybe do it in these working class areas out here. But again, Trump already did well there. Like Trump essentially had them hit their, for the time being, hit their ceiling, and he still lost the state by a point. And it gets even worse when you consider who they're running against. They're running against Bob Casey, the guy who won by 13 points in 2018. He outperformed the national environment by 4.5. And if that happens again, he'll probably win by mid to high single digits. And David McCormick is a decent candidate for Republicans. I think they could have easily done worse than him, but he's not appealing at all to the voters he needs to win over. And so at this point, you'll see why this map is getting a little tricky for Republicans because they're likely to lose Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. They are looking like they're going to lose Nevada, Arizona, and Michigan. And these remaining 3 seats, I think they win Texas, to be completely fair. But Montana and Ohio, Trump's going to win these states decisively, but Democrats have done really well here for a very long time in this specific Senate seat. In 2018, we'll start in Montana. John Tester won re-election by 3.5 over Matt Rosendale, who now is in Congress, and he underperformed Trump by, I think, 7% in 2020 or in 2022. And it was a redder environment. It was a year where Democrats didn't contest any statewide races, and Rosendale did worse than Trump, right, by 7%. So to me, he's a weak candidate, and Trump, I think, will win the state by a decent amount. He won it by 16 in 2020. But again, a lot of it trended left, specifically where the population centers are. We look at Yellowstone, that's where Billings is, trended towards Biden. You look at where Missoula is, trended towards Biden by a good amount. And overall, the western part of the state is more people and is trending left. I think Montana votes for Trump by a couple points less in 2024. And that makes it easier for Tester. It's no walk in the park, but I think if Trump can't win Montana by more than 13, I think Tester's favored. That to me is a bit of a risky statement. I think Tester could still lose. But let's say I'm right. Let's say the indictments hurt Trump. Let's say Trump continues to fall in Montana like he did in 2020. He did I think 4% worse there the second time. And let's say he only wins it by like 12 or 13. And Tester wins, he hangs on by a couple thousand votes. Democrats have brought the Senate from being down 49 to 43 to being, entirely dependent on Ohio. And it's not a great spot to be in. I'm sure they'd like the tipping point state to be like Michigan or Arizona rather than Ohio, but they have an incumbent there, and they have things to work with, to say the least. Now, Donald Trump, this is where I'm going to give him credit. He did well in Ohio 2 times. Unlike, like Pennsylvania, he did well in it once. He did well in Michigan once. He did well in, I guess you could say he did okay in Arizona once. He did horrible the second time, but he did okay in Arizona the first time. In Ohio, he won it by 8 both times, and he really helped Republicans hold on to its governorship in the 2018 midterms. He's done a lot of good things for the Republicans in Ohio. And the thing is, I don't know how much I can really knock him in this state other than what happened last year. And obviously, J.D. Vance won, but he won by 17% less than the more moderate gubernatorial nominee. And Donald Trump had a really rough 2022 in most states. In Ohio, he held on, but J.D. Vance, again, underperformed by 17 points, only won by 6, and he cost Republicans a lot of money because there were polls in the summer that showed him tied or even down to Tim Ryan, and if Republicans had secured that race back in June when they should have, they would have been able to spend tens of millions more dollars on Dr. Oz and Adam Laxalt and Blake Masters and Herschel Walker. And they couldn't because they had to bail out J.D. Vance in Ohio. And so it's not like a tangible loss, but it did cost them. And so I think at worst Trump's had a mixed record in Ohio. I think overall he's done a pretty good job of keeping it red. What I will say here is that the only downside I think he presents, excuse me, I can't talk today, but the only downside he presents for Republicans is the indictments. If the indictments truly hurt him, to the extent some people think, I think they hurt him, but I don't think they hurt him enough to make it get closer in a state like Ohio. But let's say the indictments truly hurt him. Ohio would probably narrow up by a point or two, if that. It's a right-trending state. It swung 2% to the right of the country relative to national partisanship, which means that relative to the country, Ohio in 2020 voted 12%, right? Like, because Trump won it by 8 in 2020, and he lost popular vote by 4, so voted 12% to the right of the country. He won it by 8 in 2016, lost popular vote by 2, so it went from 10% to the right of the country to 12%. Anyways, but let's say Trump really bombs in the suburbs. He does poorly in Cincinnati and Columbus and regresses in Cleveland. He'd still win the state by like 6 or 7, but if he's only up by 6 or 7 there, I think Sherrod Brown could win. Sherrod Brown overperformed Richard Cordray, who was the nominee for governor in 2018. Brown won by 7. Richard Cordray lost by just under 4, so he outran him by 11. And so if Biden lost the state of Ohio by like 7, I think he'd be in pure toss-up territory. If he lost it by 6, I think Brown would be favored by a little bit, and anything less, he'd be pretty clearly favored. But what I will say is that if Trump bombs in the suburbs and if he accelerates these, like we saw Democrats do really well in Cincinnati. They did 5.5% better in Hamilton in 2020. They did 9% better in Delaware. They improved in a lot of these counties north of Cincinnati and in the Dayton area, kind of this corridor in the bottom of the state with a lot of suburbs between Cincinnati and Columbus. If those trends kick into high gear, and if Democrats can just really accelerate their movement in that part of the state, Brown can win. Obviously, you have to do by his own. You have to do better with working class voters, but that's not really related to Trump. But if Trump can really cost Republicans in the suburbs, Brown can win because he'll be able to ride Biden's coattails in that area and focus on his specific brand, which is up in the north, the working class voters. So that's how Republicans lose the Senate. I think for now they're favored to win Ohio by maybe 2 points, and I think for that reason they'll hold on to the Senate. That's my current prediction. But let's say everything goes wrong, Trump really drags on the ticket even more than I'm expecting, and we see a map like this. Maybe Texas narrows up to within a point. That's disaster for Republicans. They have 49 guaranteed seats, and if they're barely holding on to that one seat in Texas and losing everything else, they're in a horrible position. And so that's what I'm trying to articulate this video. Donald Trump is going to likely be their nominee. I think he's favored to lose the next election. I think he will lose Nevada, lose Arizona, lose Wisconsin, lose Michigan, lose Pennsylvania, and he wins Texas, but by a smaller amount than last time. I think he wins Montana, but if that margin slips even a little bit, John Tester could easily win. And if he wins Ohio, but does so while losing ground in those areas of Columbus and Cincinnati, Democrats can hold the Senate. Again, it takes a lot. They're not favored to hold the Senate, and that's why I'm not predicting Sherrod Brown to win re-election. What I'm saying is that there is a very real possibility that Donald Trump does cost Republicans the Senate, and this is how it would unfold. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all next video.